are now coming to those aspects or those artifacts, in this case literature, which do point to Muhammad. And these are the ones that I'm going to go through now. These are the artifacts that I would suggest are the best you can get, and the ones that Muslims should be pointing to concerning whether or not Muhammad actually existed in the 7th century. Notice that everything that I'm going to be introducing in this part of the series are from outside of Arab sources. These are not Arab sources. These are all Jewish and Christian, primarily Christian sources, which is rather ironic since we can't find reference to Muhammad within Arab sources or Muslim sources, so to speak. We've had to look outside. And this is the first one, and this is the Doctrina Iacobi, or Doctrina Jacobi Nuper Baptizati is the name that is given to it, which means teaching of Jacob recently baptized. And it's a tract written by a Christian apologist from Carthage, which is today Tunis in northern Africa. Though he's actually writing about Palestine, and he's writing about this Jew who has been forcibly converted to Christianity under the auspices or under the authority of the emperor in 634. And the date that is given is July 634 AD. So we're talking roughly 2 years after Muhammad's death, if Muhammad actually died. According to the traditions, that would be the day he died, 632. So this is 634, just 2 years later. And it's a tract about these Jews that have been forcibly converted because of this edict that had come down from Heraclius. And this one Jew, Jacob, had a vision from God and so became a Christian and is now trying to persuade the others there in Carthage to become Christians. While he is discussing this, a childhood friend named Justus comes from Palestine, a Jew, comes from Palestine, and gets in a debate with Jacob about the pros and cons of being a Christian. Of course, he himself, a Jew, was quite upset that his childhood friend had become a Christian. And so the tract really is this debate back and forth. In the midst of this, right in the middle of this debate between Justus and Jacob, Justus then refers to a letter that he receives from his brother Abraham. And this is the part of the Doctrina Iacobi that is important to our needs today, because this is referring to a prophet, an Arab prophet, who is attacking the Byzantine Empire, the soldiers of Heraclius, and defeating them in Palestine. And so this is the letter from Abraham. So now let's read this part. This is the part that is our interest, and this is the one that everybody's pointing to prove that Muhammad did exist in 634 AD. You can see the date. There's a problem. We'll get to that. Hold on. This is what it says. When the candidatus, in this case, according to many of the scholars, like what I have here, Hoyland, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It, in this book here, Hoyland would say this. This is Sergius, a member of the Byzantine Imperial Army in Palestine. So when the candidatus, this fellow named Sergius, was killed by the Saracens. Now, what do we mean by Saracens? Well, Saracens comes from the word Sariq in Arabic, or Sariqin, which is the plural form, which means thief or marauder or plunderer. This is the name that is given to these Arabs that are in the northern part of Arabia. So when this candidatus, this Byzantine imperial member, was killed by the Saracens, I was at Caesarea and I set off my boat to Sycamina. People were saying the candidatus has been killed, and we Jews were overjoyed. And they were saying that the prophet had appeared, coming with the Saracens, and that he was proclaiming the advent of the Anointed One, the Christ who was to come. Having arrived in Sycamina, stopped by a certain old man well versed in scriptures, and I said to him, "What can you tell me about the prophet who has appeared with the Saracens?" He replied, groaning deeply, "He is false, for the prophets do not come armed with a sword, Truly, they are works of anarchy, being committed today, and I fear that the first Christ to come, whom the Christians worship, was the one sent by God, and we instead are preparing to receive the Antichrist. Indeed, Isaiah said that the Jews would retain a perverted and hardened heart until all the earth should be devastated. But you go, Master Abraham, and find out about the prophet who has appeared. So I, Abraham, inquired and heard from those who had met him that there was no truth to be found in this so-called prophet, only the shedding of men's blood. He says also that he, that's the prophet, has the keys of paradise, which is incredible. In other words, which is not credible. So that's the section we're interested in. That's this letter that comes from Abraham, the brother of Justus. He just mentions it in this debate that he's having with Jacob there in Carthage, in Tunis, modern-day Tunis. Now, there have been quite a few scholars that have looked at this and tried to unpack and try to ask, well, what are we looking at here? Is this Muhammad? Is this prophet that he's referring to Muhammad? And they have problems. Cronin Cook, in their book on Hagerism, says that they have a number of areas that they confront about this Doctrina Iacobi, or this passage within the Iacobi doctrine. A prophet proclaiming the Christ who was to come, they said, a Jewish Messiah, doesn't make sense. Because in Surah 33, Ayah 40, says that Muhammad is the last prophet. So if this was Muhammad, why would he be talking about a anointed one, a Christ who is yet to come? The anointed one means the Messiah, the Christ. That's what the Christ means, the anointed one. Why would he be talking about someone yet to come, since he is the seal of all prophets? And that's very clear in the Quran itself, in chapter 33, verse 40. Also, the date is a problem, they say. If this really is July, written in July, some say it could be 634 to 640, but most scholars go with the 634 date because that's what's written on the letter itself. And they say if 634, Muhammad died in 632, so how could this be Muhammad? How could this be the prophet, be the one that they're referring to there in way up in Palestine, in Jerusalem, 2 years after he's dead? So that's the second problem. And then the third problem is this phrase, he has the keys of paradise. This confronts everything we know about Muhammad. Muhammad, in the traditions, does not have the key of paradise. So you can see this would confront everything we know about the classical account. Nevo and Koren, Yehuda Nevo and Judith Koren, who have written this book right here, this one here, Crossroads to Islam, Yehuda Nevo and Judith Koren. They go into much more detail into this, and they really confront it on a number of different levels. And what they're saying is that this prophet, that we see in this tract, just this section of it, actually is more of a Jewish or Christian prophet, not a Muslim prophet, on a number of reasons. It fits this Judeo-Christian monotheistic background to begin with. And this idea of the anointed one to come, which is the Christ, or the Christos in Greek, which is the word that's given there. In Hebrew, that would be Mashiach, who is yet to come. Agreeing with what both Cronin and Cook said, this doesn't make sense because there's no way in the world that you have a prophet that comes after Muhammad. So this cannot be Muhammad. This is more likely a Christian prophet or a sectarian prophet that comes out of a Christian environment. Arab, yes, Arab, but an Arab Christian environment. And the word keys of paradise. This comes from the Bible. This is in Matthew chapter 16, verse 19, and it's referring to Peter is the one who has the keys of paradise, which is referring to the fact of his papal authority over the church. That's why the Catholics look to Peter as the one who is referring to. So how could this be Muhammad, since there's no way in the world that this would be acceptable unless, of course, this is within a Christian Judeo or especially Christian environment. What's more, this is written referring to written in Aramaic, not Arabic, because Jews who this was to and this was from, Abraham would have spoken Aramaic. He would not have spoken Arabic. So that for those four reasons, they say that this cannot be Muhammad. So what are their conclusions? Let's look at some of their conclusions. Cronin and Cook say this. This testimony is, of course, irreconcilable with the Islamic account of the prophet's career. We have here older material, a stratum of belief older than the Islamic tradition itself. John Wansborough, considered to be one of the fathers of the whole revisionist school, talks about this idea of prophethood, because the fact that there's this name prophet in the Doctrina Iacobi, he says, hold on a minute, And this is what he says. Prophethood was a monotheistic constant, a basic belief, concrete examples of which arose in the area in every monotheistic religion. The specific manifestation, of course, differing from religion to religion. In other words, every leader called himself prophet. In order to get authority, you refer to yourself as a prophet. And that's how you gain your credibility for those who you're trying to lead. And if he was an Arab, all the more so, because he was coming and he was confronting the Byzantine Empire there in Jerusalem, that underneath Heraclius, they would have controlled that area. So he was coming as an Arab who wanted to then usurp the authority of the church there, the Byzantine church. So that's why I say they would, of course, use the word prophet. They would, of course, call themselves a prophet. And, of course, being an Arab, this would have fit right into that milieu at that time, at that period, and in that place. Nevo and Koren, who I referred to earlier, say this, and this is their conclusion. The Doctrina Iacobi, or Jacobi, provides no support for the identification of this prophet with Muhammad. In fact, if one thing is clear, it is that the account in the Doctrina Iacobi does not describe the Muhammad that we know. He could more easily be almost anybody else. In those troubled years, there can have been no shortage of such prophets, appealing to the various Christian and Jewish sects. And then Robert Spencer concludes this. Robert Spencer, that I'll be interviewing on Tuesday, says this: inasmuch as the keys of paradise are more akin to Peter's keys to the kingdom of heaven than to anything in Muhammad's message, the prophet in the Doctrina Iacobi seems closer to a Christian or Christian-influenced messianic millennialist than to the prophet of Islam as he is depicted in Islam's canonical literature. Well, so what's the conclusion? Well, the fact is we're still waiting for this name Muhammad. That we can't find in the Doctrina Jacobi. So who is this prophet? Well, it's obvious to me, as Wansborough and Koren and Spencer and Crone and Cook have said. It seems to me that they are correct. This is a prophet. He is an Arab. He is using the sword, and he's very much a brigand who is going and destroying the Byzantine Empire there, certainly in Jerusalem and there in Palestine. But is this Muhammad? Well, first of all, it disagrees with the tradition. It disagrees with the view of someone coming after Muhammad. That completely confronts the tradition. It also disagrees with this view of Muhammad having the keys to paradise. That is a biblical concept for the person of Peter. So in almost every category, you've got the wrong man at the wrong place doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. What's more, as we've said from the very beginning, there's no reference that this prophet is Muhammad. There's no reference that this prophet came from Mecca. There's no reference that this prophet was a Muslim, or that he followed a religion called Islam, or that he received a revelation called the Quran. That's what we're looking for, and we still can't find it. So this is the first historical evidence that comes from the 7th century, comes from 634, is dated, that we can look at. I always assumed that this was Muhammad, because when I heard about Doctrina Iacobi way back in the 1990s, when I was studying under Dr. Gerald Hottig, we talked about the Doctrina Iacobi, and we assumed that this was Muhammad, until some of us, and not myself, but others came and started writing about this time and saying, take a better look at the references, look and see these two references to an anointed one, and also the keys of paradise. This could not be Muhammad, because it not only confronts the tradition, it also confronts the historical context of who Muhammad would be if this had been Muhammad. So from what I've seen here, I would have to say this is not Muhammad. Yes, a prophet. Yes, an Arab. Yes, using the sword. Yes, coming up and destroying the Byzantine soldiers there in Palestine, but not the Muhammad of history. Or let me just put it this way, not the Muhammad of the traditions, not the Muhammad of the classical account. So we're going to have to throw that one away. I had always thought it was all these days, and I used to always think that because of the Doctrina Jacobi and the writings of Sabaeus, which come later, we're going to talk about that yet to come, I always assumed that there was a Muhammad. There was a man named Muhammad. Was he the Muhammad of the traditions? I would have to say no, absolutely, and he's certainly not the Muhammad, the historical Muhammad that we're looking for. Well, good. That's the Doctrina Jacobi. We'll go to the next one now. This is Jaden here in my office. Over and out.